Good evening, class. Sorry I can't be with you all tonight. We're on the road, hopefully getting a win on the basketball court. So my social studies unit that I worked on this semester, the title of it is called Children's Lives at the Turn of the 20th Century. So a brief overview of the unit. The goal of the unit is to deepen understanding of children's lives in the early 20th century. An overview of these lessons. In these lessons, students will gain an understanding of kind of what the country was like during this time period from early 1900s until as late as World War I, and what life was like for them and how different life was from them and from our students in the classroom now. So for my pre-assessment or pre-activity, I'm using a primary source, which is a picture of an elementary school classroom, which you can see there. And so it's an elementary school classroom in the early 1900s. And so with this picture up on the board, the students will write down all the similarities they see between this room and the classroom that they're sitting in, kind of like we did in class a few weeks ago, and with that writing differences. So this is just kind of to get the students used to just a quick glimpse of how the classroom was different back then from what it is now, and just kind of a little background from what those kids are living in. So my first lesson is my book backdrop, and so for that book, what I did was Sky Boys, how they built the Empire State Building. And so kind of the main overview of this lesson is to talk about children's lives and how a lot of them had to work, and it wasn't just all fun and games for most of them during this time, especially during the Great Depression. And in this book it talks about a kid's life during the Great Depression. So to introduce this book, I'm talking about a primary source. It is called High Up on the Top Floor of a New York City Skyscraper. And as you can see in the source, it's a mother and her two children. They're knitting garments. You couldn't really see too well, but knitting garments to have an income and to make money to support their family during this time. And as you can tell in the picture, the little kids' faces, they didn't look too happy. So kind of introduce that, talk to the kids about just what are some chores they have to do at home, or what are some jobs that they have to do, and just compare those to some of the jobs that children had to do back then during this time of the Depression, and how different they were and how hard life actually was. So to introduce this book, and then reading this book, Sky Boys, how they built the Empire State Building. As you can see, it's a pretty illustrated book, which talks about a young boy who lived during the Depression with his father, and it talks to him about how this giant skyscraper in New York was a symbol of hope, and they built it, and it just showed how his relationship with his dad throughout that building process. So that was pretty cool. So the main purpose of that book and lesson is just to get a better glimpse of how kids' lives, it wasn't all fun and games during this time, and how different that is for our students today. And you can see that great through this book. My second lesson is a then and now lesson. With this lesson, students are going to comparing a lot of items, not so much with kids, but actual items, to get a little background knowledge of items then and now. So for this activity, this is where you have your worksheet, that your hands-on activity that should be passed out to you. And in this activity, as you guys can see in front of you, we go through a lot of items that were the same then and now. So a lot of the items we talked about we'd make as class. This is just an example, such as like different food items, like food, meat, apples, just other items like cars, clothing, things like that. And in those items, students are going to write down the prices, the research prices in their groups of what they think they are in like 2016, and then using an inflation calculator, which can be found online. Students in the groups will change that price from 2016 to 1916, and that's just a cool glimpse of how prices have changed in the past 100 years, and how that would affect their living styles back 100 years ago from today, and how different things were. They're not walking around with iPhones and laptops, and just getting kids' perspective on that. My third and final lesson is a history timeline. In this lesson, it's a lot of background knowledge of our country's history, of why maybe times were so hard for kids at this time. So for this activity, it's a timeline where students have 5 blocks, kind of like the one we worked on in class, where they write 5 significant events that happened during this time period. So some of those significant events that I had on mine were like the Great Depression, World War I, and then ending with World War II in the 40s. And just some of these events just show that it was a hard time in our country's history, and so how that affected the home lives of children at home. And so students will kind of get a glimpse of that through that lesson. For my final assessment for this whole unit, since they are 5th and even 6th graders, my students will be writing a reflective essay, kind of how they think they would adapt to live if they were living during this time period as these kids were, and how life would truly be different for them. And with that assessment, just get a glimpse of see how much they learned of this unit and how different the lives were of those children, to get a little background knowledge of those kids. And so that is my learning unit for this semester. Thank you for watching my video.